here's another crazy video about prehistoric activity on a mountain this time, right outside Las Cruces. There are large complex glyphs and what I believe to be tomb sites on this mountain. It may sound unbelievable, but when you see that just about every glyph is outlined by a road, and when you zoom in and you see that every eye, every nose, every mouth, every feature is a modification on the landscape where somebody either scraped the ground or piled up rocks or even dug a quarry out of the ground, it can not be denied. As you can see from these pictures, the mountain looks pretty strange. I'm going to start here at the lower part of the mountain where there's a pretty obvious figure outlined in roads. He even has a face. If you go up on the hill, you'll see that there's disturbances there. Now, right above this figure, kind of on his shoulder, is another figure. And this one appears to be a guy leaning back and either having some sort of dental work done or he's being tortured. Here's how it looks from this angle. He actually looks a little Egyptian. Now with this glyph, it's where it really gets unbelievable. This appears to be a gorilla. Now, I know right there people say this can't be, but actually to me it doesn't surprise me because of my theory that the 6 tribes of the Aztec that I believe were here and built all this, these prehistoric features, I believe came from all parts of the world. And I'm finding glyphs that seem to indicate that. And even right here, I'm going to show you more glyphs. A couple look very Asian. Now, if you kind of draw out what else is here, it appears this gorilla has his arms around this other kind of almost armored looking guy. And the gorilla has claws for hands. Again, all these animal elements is pretty common around the world. People were combining human and animal forms in a lot of their art prehistorically. And again, if you don't believe this, later on I'm going to zoom in and show you how these things were built. And if you look at different parts of this mountain and look in different ways, you'll find various faces and other animals. I believe that these are all purposely made. Now, if you kind of step back a little and look at this mountain in this picture, I know you won't believe it, but this is what I see. And the reason that this doesn't surprise me is because I've seen some other glyphs indicating underwater divers with goggles. This appears to be a gorilla, and this is the first I've seen that appears to have some sort of oxygen device or a breathing device underwater. This glyph is so complex that it even shows the eyes and the water leaking into the mask. If you ever been a diver, you'll recognize that scene immediately. Now let's flip this over. Those other shots were looking to the east, or with east at the top. Here, west is at the top. And there appears to be a fairly gruesome glyph here. Looks kind of Asian, and it's a person that's bound. The mouth is open in a scream, and there's a large teardrop. These features are a quarry and a large pile of rocks. All the other pieces or elements of the face are scrapes, holes that are dug out. It's all purposely modified to look like this. I've been out there and seen it. I'm going to zoom in and show you what the right eye of this face really is. It's a quarry with a bunch of rocks piled up. It's a pretty strange feature, and as none of the rock appears to have been taken anywhere else. It's either all right here or it's down on near the base of the hill where recent construction of this park, they moved those rocks around and used them to line the road, unfortunately. It's really strange when you go out there and see that all these rocks are just kind of laid out. They're not stacked up by a bulldozer or a truck or anything. And then when you look at the quarry itself, the whole west wall of this has been built up with big rocks and boulders. Now, if you were going to just quarry rock out of here historically, you wouldn't bother to do that. You would just be taking all this material out and just cutting down the side of the hill. But here, the rock and material has been built up to make this into a reservoir. So there you look again, and you see that right eye with the teardrop. That's what we were just looking at. Now here's the left eye. It's probably not finished. Look at the rocks in there in the front. I mean, when I was there, I was like, this just doesn't look right. This looks like some sort of marker. And I think it was. So if we look at some other ways you can view this hill, there's some other animal shapes, kind of a dog or even a dog dragon kind of look. There might be a mouth or a tongue. You can look at it different ways. A couple dark spots there could be eyes of another glyph. There are elements of glyphs when you look at it from the other side, so it could be a monkey face or something intended there. So anyway, I was going to show you that some of this dark on the north side, it's just like a grove of acacia. It's so thick that you can tell looking up there that just doesn't look right. So possibly this was an acacia farm prehistorically. I'm going to show you another place on the west side of the mountain. Forms a bulldog reaching up for a treat or something. Unfortunately, this is where they decided to build the parking lot for this park. This is what it used to look like. It was all these basins and hills, and all these big rocks were in there somewhere. I can't tell from these old photos, but when you look at the newer photos, you can see they're all lined up along the road. I think these rocks may have marked tombs that existed, or they may have been out there intended to be used in future tombs. Unfortunately, if they were marking tombs, that information is lost. I'm going to show you one here. What I think is going on is there's this mine shaft right here by the base of the hill, kind of in a place where you wouldn't expect them to be digging a mine shaft if you're digging for minerals. And then there's this big rock sitting right next to it that, again, I think they were going to use these as cap rocks, and that was part of the purpose of the quarry. But these people, whenever they dug a hole, they made it into a reservoir too, because they knew water is life out in this desert. And we don't understand that they had to go to extremes to get water. They were digging wells deep into the ground. They were building big reservoirs and canal systems. They were doing everything they could to just gather every drop of water that they possibly could. Now I'm going to zoom in on some of the close-up features that you can see. This is around where the gorilla's mouth would be, and you can see that there are alignments of rock. It's another part of the hill, that part of one of these glyphs, and it's all scraped. Again, you look here, the whole landscape has been modified. It's all scraped. Every little pit, white spot on the ground is an element in one of these glyphs. They were taking rock and stacking it up, clearing rock around places to make eyes. So when you look at this figure and you look at the head off to the right that kind of is armored, under oblique lighting it disappears totally. But as you get more direct lighting from above, all those red darker areas, that's all rock that has been laid out in those patterns. And the lighter areas have been cleared of rock. So let's zoom in on this guy. It's kind of a gruesome image. There's the bottom jaw. It's an old feature, and you can see a canal runs off to the right. Follow that canal, it goes into this little basin. So there's what water is doing here. This is a prehistoric feature to catch water. And if you look at that basin, it's a Quetzalcoatl. off to the left of the Quetzalcoatl, it looks like there's another scraped area that was going to be a separate face. The mines on top of the mountain form a glyph of a guy appears to have an erection. Off to the right, there's another figure. There's been modern buildings on the place where there might be an eye there of some figure. So some of it's been messed up a little bit. If you zoom out, you can see there's more elements to this glyph. And if you flip it around, it turns out to look like an old skinny Asian guy with an erection. In conclusion, I believe this mountain to have been totally modified prehistorically, that almost every one of these roads and paths were created prehistorically. They appear to outline glyphs. The face on this is made from a large reservoir. The teardrop is that big pile of rocks, etc. I believe the mines on this mountain are prehistoric features. The open shafts that historic people ended up reusing were tombs that people were not interred in yet. This could be because they moved away or they were defeated in battle. In the Aztec history, there's at least 2 large rebellions that occurred in what I believe was this region of New Mexico. I think some of the spots on here where there's disturbances might be tombs that have actually had people interred in them and are now filled in, and that these large rocks from this quarry were being used as capstones for tombs. And the quarry itself was going to be a reservoir, but again, a lot of this was incomplete. And I wanted to add again that finding glyphs with iconography from around the world, it's really not surprising to me at this point. I've seen a lot of this now in New Mexico, and the only conclusion I can come to is that the tribes of the Aztec came from different parts of the world, and that we've been really underestimating how much people traveled around the world prehistorically. It's ridiculous that we consider them to be such inept people prehistorically, when we know today that there's a lot of inept people out in sailboats sailing across the ocean. So it's not that big a deal. And I think it's good to be skeptical. I've always been skeptical. But it's different than underestimating human beings. And unfortunately, knowing from my experiences, archaeologists are some of the worst at underestimating human beings. They seem to think, especially in the Americas, that people were dancing around, not really very motivated to do anything, even though we know there were these great complex cultures in Mexico. We seem to think that the people up here were these savages still. I mean, we've got to get rid of this ideology that prehistoric peoples were inept. I think they were sailing around the world 30,000 years ago, and that they kept doing it all through prehistory. And it wasn't until Western cultures came into the scene and decided to rewrite history and to pretty much obliterate these other cultures and their writings and histories that's the reason we don't understand this today.